Welcome to Certified Data Engineer Associate DEA-C01 Practice Exam Number 4. You'll get 30 exam-style questions. I will read each question, then give you a 10-second countdown to review the answer choices on screen. Feel free to pause the video if you need longer. After each countdown, I will reveal the correct answer and explanation. Question 1. A data engineer at a Datum Corp is designing a data warehouse on Amazon Redshift. The warehouse has a large fact table with 500 million rows that is frequently joined with a small dimension table containing 5,000 product records. The fact table is also joined with a medium-sized customer table containing 10 million rows on the customer ID column. Which combination of distribution styles should the data engineer use? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Key distribution on the customer ID column for both the fact table and the customer table ensures that rows with matching customer ID values are co-located on the same slices, eliminating data redistribution during joins. This is optimal for the large join between the 500 million row fact table and the 10 million row customer table. All distribution for the small 5,000 row product dimension table places a full copy on every node, enabling local joins with the fact table without data movement. Even distribution for the fact table would not co-locate matching join keys. Auto distribution may not select the optimal strategy for this specific join pattern. All distribution for the fact table with 500 million rows would consume enormous storage across all nodes and dramatically slow load times. Question 2. Contoso Genomics needs to store 500 TB of genomic research data in Amazon S3. The data is accessed frequently during the first 60 days of a research project, then rarely accessed for the next 2 years, and must be retained for 7 years total for regulatory compliance at the lowest possible cost. The team wants to minimize management overhead for storage class transitions. Which S3 storage strategy should the team implement? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. S3 intelligent tiering automatically moves objects between frequent access, infrequent access, and archive instant access tiers based on access patterns, with no retrieval fees for these transitions. Activating the optional archive access and deep archive access tiers extends automatic tiering to lower-cost archive storage for objects not accessed for 90 and 180 plus days respectively. This minimizes management overhead because transitions are fully automatic based on actual access patterns. Manual lifecycle rules require predicting access patterns in advance and do not adapt to changing usage. Manually moving objects is operationally intensive. One zone IA stores data in a single availability zone, which is inappropriate for regulatory compliance data that requires higher durability. Question 3. A Datum Financial processes stock trade data using Amazon Kinesis data streams. The stream has 10 shards in provisioned mode. During market open hours, the data engineer notices frequent provision throughput exceeded exception errors on the consumer side. 3 separate consumer applications read from the same stream using the standard GetRecords API. Each consumer processes data independently. What is the most effective solution to resolve the consumer throughput issue? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Enhanced Fanout provides each registered consumer with a dedicated 2 MB/s read throughput per shard via HTTP/2 push using the Subscribe to Shard API, completely eliminating contention between consumers. With standard shared consumers, 3 applications sharing the same shards are limited to a combined 2 MB/s per shard with only 5 GetRecords calls per second per shard, which is the root cause of the provision throughput exceeded exception. Increasing shards from 10 to 30 would triple costs and is unnecessary since the issue is consumer contention, not insufficient total capacity. The Kinesis producer library is for writing data, not reading. Reducing batch size would increase the number of API calls needed, potentially worsening the throttling issue. Question 4. A data engineer needs to run a one-time ad hoc query to retrieve specific columns from a 25-column Apache Parquet dataset registered in the AWS Glue data catalog. The solution must be serverless with no operational overhead. Which solution best meets these requirements? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Amazon Athena is serverless, requires no infrastructure provisioning, and directly queries Apache Parquet files registered in the Glue data catalog using standard SQL. Parquet's columnar storage format allows Athena to read only the columns specified in the select clause, reducing data scanned and lowering cost. For a one-time ad hoc query, Athena requires only writing the SQL statement. There is nothing to configure, deploy, or manage. S3 Object Lambda is a data transformation tool that intercepts and modifies S3 GET responses using Lambda functions. It is not designed for interactive SQL column selection and requires writing and deploying Lambda code. A Lambda function with a Pandas data frame is constrained by Lambda's memory and execution time limits, requires development effort, and processes the data after a full read from S3 rather than leveraging Parquet's columnar skipping. Glue Databrew requires creating a project, configuring a dataset connection, and building a recipe through multiple setup steps, which is disproportionate overhead for a single ad hoc column retrieval. Question 5. Tailspin Pharmaceuticals has an AWS Glue ETL job that processes JSON records containing nested arrays and deeply nested objects. The data must be flattened into a relational format suitable for loading into Amazon Redshift. The team needs to convert nested JSON structures into multiple related tables with foreign key relationships. Which Glue dynamic frame transformation should the team use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. The relationalized transformation is specifically designed to flatten nested JSON structures into multiple related tables connected by auto-generated foreign keys, making it ideal for loading into relational databases like Redshift. It converts arrays into separate tables with join keys that reference the parent record. Apply mapping can rename and cast columns, but cannot decompose nested arrays into separate related tables. Unbox parses string fields containing serialized data, like JSON strings within a string column, into type structs, but does not flatten structures into relational tables. Resolve choice resolves ambiguous column types, but does not transform nested structures into relational format. Question 6. A data engineer at Contoso Logistics is designing a real-time analytics pipeline. Sensor data from delivery trucks arrives in Amazon Kinesis data streams at 500 MB/s. The data must be available for SQL queries in Amazon Redshift serverless within seconds. The engineer wants to eliminate intermediate S3 staging to reduce latency. Which approach meets these requirements with the least operational overhead? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Redshift streaming ingestion allows direct consumption of Kinesis data streams data into materialized views without any intermediate S3 staging, providing the lowest latency path from stream to queryable data. The setup requires creating an external schema referencing the Kinesis stream and a materialized view to land the data, which can be refreshed automatically. Amazon Data Firehose with S3 staging introduces additional latency and an intermediate storage layer, which contradicts the requirement to eliminate S3 staging. A KCL application on eSeatWo requires managing infrastructure and custom code, adding significant operational overhead. Amazon Managed Service for Apache Flink with a JDBC sync adds unnecessary complexity and does not eliminate the need for connection management. Question 7. Fabricam Insurance uses AWS DMS to migrate data from an on-premises SQL Server database to an Amazon Aurora PostgreSQL database. The source database contains tables with large lob columns storing PDF documents averaging 15 MB each, though most documents are under 2 MB with occasional larger files. The migration is running extremely slowly because DMS is performing individual lookups for every lob value, which DMS configuration change will improve migration performance while ensuring complete lob data transfer. Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Inline lob mode provides the best balance of performance and completeness for this scenario. It transfers lobs smaller than the specified inline size directly within the main data stream, avoiding the expensive per row lob lookup that causes slowness in full lob mode. Since most documents are under 2 MB, the majority of lobs will be transferred efficiently inline, while the occasional larger PDFs automatically fall back to full lob mode to ensure no data is lost. Limited lob mode with a 20 MB maximum would improve performance through bulk loading and memory pre-allocation, but it truncates any lob exceeding the configured size, creating a risk of data loss if any PDF exceeds 20 MB. Increasing the lob chunk size above 64 KB can cause task failures according to AWS documentation, and does not address the fundamental performance problem of per row lookups in full lob mode. Removing lob columns and using data sync adds significant operational complexity, breaks the relationship between lob data and parent records, and requires custom logic to reassociate documents with their database rows after migration. Question 8. Fabricam Analytics runs a step function standard workflow that processes millions of customer records stored in an S3 CSV file. The workflow uses a distributed map state to process records in parallel with up to 10,000 concurrent child executions. During a recent run, several child executions failed due to transient lambda throttling errors. The team wants the workflow to automatically handle transient failures while also capturing persistent failures for manual review. Which error handling configuration meets these requirements? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Configuring retries on the Lambda task state within each child workflow with the specific Lambda too many requests exception error handles transient throttling at the source where it occurs. Setting max attempts to 5 with exponential backoff gives Lambda time to recover from throttling. The tolerated failure percentage on the distributed map allows the overall workflow to succeed even if a small percentage of child executions fail after exhausting retries, while failures exceeding the threshold trigger states exceed tolerated failure threshold for manual review. Retrying at the distributed map level restarts all child executions, not just the failed ones, which is wasteful and expensive. Using only redrive without retries means every transient error requires manual intervention. A catch block alone without retries does not handle transient failures automatically. Question 9. A data engineer needs to schedule daily AWS Glue jobs that do not require execution or completion at a specific time. Which solution runs the Glue jobs most cost-effectively? Select 1 answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. The Flex Execution class in AWS Glue runs jobs on spare compute capacity in the AWS Cloud at a discounted rate compared to the standard execution class. Because spare capacity availability can fluctuate, Flex jobs may experience variable startup times and can be interrupted and restarted. But for daily workloads with no strict execution window or deadline, this variability is an acceptable trade-off for the cost reduction. Flex is specifically designed for non-time sensitive batch workloads. Spot instances are an ETL purchasing option and are not a configuration option available in AWS Glue job properties. Glue abstracts the underlying compute infrastructure. The standard execution class uses dedicated capacity with predictable startup and execution times, which is appropriate for time-sensitive production jobs, but costs more than Flex for workloads where timing flexibility is available. The Glue version field specifies the Glue runtime version that determines available features and engine improvements, but has no direct bearing on execution cost or job scheduling behavior. Question 10. Litware Corp has an Amazon Aurora PostgreSQL global database with a primary cluster in ASEAN-1 and secondary clusters in EU West-1 and App Southeast-1. During a regional outage simulation, the team needs to promote the EU West-1 secondary cluster to become the new primary. What happens to the App Southeast-1 cluster during the failover process? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. When a secondary cluster in an Aurora global database is promoted to primary through the managed planned failover or detach and promote process, the remaining secondary clusters automatically reconfigure to replicate from the newly promoted primary cluster. This ensures continuity of the global database topology without manual intervention for the remaining secondary regions. The App Southeast-1 cluster is not deleted during failover, as Aurora Global Database maintains cluster membership across the promotion process. The cluster does not become standalone because Aurora manages the replication topology changes automatically. The cluster cannot continue replicating from the original primary in ASEAN-1 because that region is experiencing an outage and the old primary is demoted. Question 11. Tailspin Technology uses Amazon SQS FIFO queues to process financial transaction messages. The system must handle 50,000 messages per second while maintaining strict ordering per customer account. Each message is approximately 2 KB. The application is deployed in the US East and Virginia region. Which configuration should the data engineer implement? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. Enabling high throughput mode on SQS FIFO queues allows throughput of up to 70,000 transactions per second per API action in supported regions such as US East and Virginia, which exceeds the 50,000 messages per second requirement. SQS FIFO achieves this throughput by distributing messages across multiple partitions based on message group IDs, with each partition supporting up to 3,000 messages per second with batching. Using the customer account ID as the message group ID ensures strict per customer ordering while enabling parallel processing across different customer accounts, which also maximizes partition utilization. Switching to a standard queue would sacrifice exactly once processing and strict ordering guarantees that are critical for financial transactions. Setting visibility timeout to 12 hours is unrelated to throughput and would cause excessive delays when reprocessing failed messages. Using a single message group ID would funnel all messages through a single partition, limiting throughput to 3,000 messages per second with batching, which is far below the 50,000 messages per second requirement. Question 12. Northwind Retail is designing a data lake on Amazon S3 and needs to choose the appropriate encryption strategy. The data lake stores customer financial records that are accessed by analytics teams in 3 different AWS accounts. The security team requires that all encryption keys be auditable through AWS CloudTrail and that the encryption keys can be shared across accounts. Which encryption approach should the team implement? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. SSC KMS with a customer-managed KMS key is the correct approach because it provides CloudTrail audit logging of all encryption and decryption API calls and supports cross-account access through KMS key policies. The key policy can explicitly grant decrypt permissions to IAM principals in other AWS accounts. SSCS3 encrypts data, but does not provide per-object CloudTrail audit trails for encryption operations. The AWS managed key, AWS/S3, cannot be shared cross-account because its key policy cannot be modified to grant access to external accounts. SSCC requires the caller to provide the encryption key with every request, which adds operational complexity and does not integrate with CloudTrail for key usage auditing. Question 13. A data engineer at Litware Logistics needs to replicate data from an Amazon DynamoDB table to Amazon S3 for analytics. The table receives approximately 10,000 writes per second and stores 500 GB of data. The export must not consume any read capacity from the production table and must include data from the last 30 days. Which approach meets these requirements? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. DynamoDB export to S3 uses point-in-time recovery, PITR, data and does not consume any read capacity units from the production table. This is critical for a high-traffic table handling 10,000 writes per second, where additional read load could cause throttling. The export supports incremental exports that can capture changes within a specified time range, meeting the 30-day requirement. The data is exported in DynamoDB JSON or Amazon ION format. DynamoDB streams with Lambda would consume read capacity through the stream processing and adds operational complexity for a batch export use case. A glue ETL scan would consume significant RCUs from the table, potentially impacting production traffic. Kinesis data streams for DynamoDB would capture ongoing changes, but does not provide a historical export of existing data, and would require additional infrastructure for the initial backfill. Question 14. A company has a Lambda-based data pipeline that runs Amazon Athena queries in a specific order. Results are used for real-time decisions, so the pipeline must handle failures gracefully and be easy to monitor. Which two options most efficiently orchestrate this process? Select two, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option C and option D. Lambda with the Athena Start Query Execution API initiates queries asynchronously without holding a compute resource open while Athena processes the query, which is cost-efficient and integrates naturally with event-driven pipelines. Step Functions orchestrates the sequence using wait states and get query execution polling to check completion before advancing, providing built-in retry logic, error handling, and visual monitoring of the workflow. AWS Batch is designed for batch compute jobs and has no native integration with Athena query management. AWS Glue Python shell jobs incur Glue DPU costs even while waiting for an Athena query to complete, making them unnecessarily expensive for this use case. Amazon MWAA provides powerful workflow orchestration, but introduces significantly more setup and management overhead than the Lambda and Step Functions combination for this specific sequential query pattern. Question 15. Contoso Telecom has a Kinesis data stream with 20 shards processing cell tower performance data. 5 different analytics applications need to consume data from this stream simultaneously with minimal latency. The data engineer observes provision throughput exceeded exception errors on the consumer side. Which solution should the data engineer implement? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Enhanced Fanout provides dedicated 2 MB/s read throughput per consumer per shard via HTTP/2 push using the Subscribe to Shard API. With 5 consumers sharing the standard 2 MB/s per shard read capacity, each consumer effectively gets only 400 KB/s per shard, causing provision throughput exceeded exception when they compete for the shared throughput. Enhanced fanout gives each of the 5 consumers their own dedicated 2 MB/s per shard, eliminating contention. Kinesis supports up to 20 registered enhanced fanout consumers. Doubling shards increases total throughput, but does not solve the contention problem since all 5 consumers still share the per shard read capacity. Combining applications into one KCL application changes the application architecture and may not be feasible if each application has different processing logic. Increasing batch size to 10,000 records does not help because the throughput limit is based on data volume 2 MB/s, an API call frequency, 5 GET records calls per second per shard, not batch size. Question 16. Fabricam Corp has an Amazon Redshift cluster and needs to run a query that joins a 2 TB fact table stored in the cluster with a 500 GB historical archive stored as Parquet files in Amazon S3. The S3 data is cataloged in the Glue Data Catalog. Some of the S3 data was recently moved to the S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval Storage class to reduce costs. What issue will the data engineer encounter? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Redshift Spectrum cannot query data stored in any Amazon S3 Glacier storage class, including Glacier Instant Retrieval, Glacier Flexible Retrieval, and Glacier Deep Archive. The data must first be restored to a non-Glacier storage class, such as S3 Standard or Standard AA, before Spectrum can access it. Redshift Spectrum has no file size limit for Parquet files on S3. Redshift Spectrum natively integrates with the Glue Data Catalog as its external metastore. Spectrum is specifically designed to join external S3 tables with local Redshift tables in federated queries. Question 17. A data engineer at a Datum Financial needs to build a pipeline that captures changes from an Amazon RDS for MySQL database and delivers them to both an Amazon S3 data lake and an Amazon OpenSearch service domain for search indexing. The pipeline must support continuous replication with minimal lag. Which architecture should the engineer implement? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Using DMS-CDC to write to Kinesis data streams provides the most efficient fan-out architecture. DMS captures changes from MySQL via binary log reading and streams them to KDS. From KDS, Amazon Data Firehose can deliver data to both S3 and OpenSearch service as separate delivery streams, each with independent buffering and delivery configurations. This approach provides continuous replication with minimal lag and decouples the 2 destinations. DMS writing directly to S3 with Lambda triggers adds latency because DMS writes S3 files in batches, not per record. Running 2 separate DMS tasks doubles the load on the source database's binary log, which can impact production performance. A custom EC2-based solution requires managing replication logic, scaling, and failover manually, adding significant operational overhead. Question 18. A data engineer at Contoso Corp is implementing data quality checks on an ETL pipeline using AWS Glue Data Quality. The pipeline processes daily sales transactions, and the team needs to verify that the transaction date column contains only recent data within the last 48 hours. The customer ID column has no null values, and the total amount column values are positive numbers. Which combination of DQDL rule types should the data engineer use? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Data freshness validates that data in a date/timestamp column is within a specified recency threshold, making it ideal for verifying transaction date is within 48 hours. Completeness checks for null or blank values in a column and returns a ratio, which can verify customer ID has no nulls when set to a threshold of 1. Column values validates that values meet specified conditions such as being greater than 0, which verifies total amount is positive. Using column values for transaction date would require complex date arithmetic rather than a simple freshness check. Is unique checks for uniqueness, not completeness of customer ID. Mean checks the average value, not whether individual values are positive. File freshness checks the recency of S3 files, not column-level data freshness. Sum and standard deviation are aggregate checks that do not validate individual row values. Question 19. Tailspin Media stores video metadata in Amazon DynamoDB with a composite primary key of content ID partition key and upload date sort key. Analysts need to query metadata by genre and rating to build recommendation models. The queries must return results as quickly as possible. Which approach should the data engineer implement? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. A global secondary index with genre as the partition key and rating as the sort key enables efficient queries by genre with the ability to filter or sort by rating. GSIs have their own throughput capacity and support queries across all partition keys of the base table. A local secondary index cannot be created because it must share the same partition key as the base table content ID, and the requirement is to query by genre, which is a different attribute. Scan with filter expression reads the entire table and applies filters after reading, consuming significant RCU and providing poor performance. Exporting to S3 and querying with Athena introduces significant latency and is suitable for analytical workloads, not for fast metadata retrieval. Question 20. Fabricam Insurance needs to track all write operations, put object, delete object, copy object, to their S3 claims data bucket for compliance auditing. The audit trail must be queryable using SQL, retained for 7 years, and cost-effective for infrequent queries. Which solution meets these requirements with the least operational overhead? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. CloudTrail data events with write-only filtering captures all put object, delete object, and copy object operations with full request details. CloudTrail Lake provides a managed SQL query engine with configurable retention up to 10 years, eliminating the need to manage log storage or set up separate query infrastructure. S3 event notifications with Lambda and DynamoDB requires building and maintaining custom infrastructure, and DynamoDB is expensive for 7-year bulk data retention. S3 server access logging captures access, but the log format is less structured than CloudTrail, and querying Glacier Deep Archive data with Athena requires restoring objects first. Macy is designed for sensitive data discovery, not operation-level audit logging. That is the end of practice exam number 4. Review the questions you missed, then come back for the next batch.